new edition of the Indian Express Explained Live, our series of online explanatory conversations with domain experts and authorities on specific subjects. I am Monojit Majumdar. Sorry. Sorry for the interruption. There seems to be some. Okay, I think we're done now. It's okay. It's okay. Sorry. Even after 2 years of the pandemic, I don't seem to be that good with the online handling. So I was saying that I was introducing myself. I am Monojit Majumdar, editor for explanatory journalism at the Indian Express. Now, as some of you might be knowing, we have been doing these events for almost 6 years now, and I always begin with a few sentences about Explained itself, a section of the Indian Express that is very special to us. We think of Explained, the content in our paper and on our website, as well as in events such as this one, as being rooted in the news, but going beyond just the news. So it is context, it is background, it is connecting the dots, it is obviously analysis. Now, in today's noisy news environment, I'm sure a lot of you will agree with me, an explanation of the news, why something is happening, what will happen from here on, how it is going to impact you, is perhaps as important as the news itself. This evening, we're talking about India's power sector, specifically coal, and the future of coal in India's energy mix. The trigger for this event is the current spike in power demand and the shortage of coal at several thermal power plants, which has forced a number of states to resort to load shedding. Now, why is this happening? Are the reasons temporary or are they more structural? What is the future of coal as the world moves inexorably towards greener energy sources? To answer some of these questions, and I'm sure many more, is one of India's foremost experts in the sector, Mr. Partha Sarathi Bhattacharyya. Welcome to the Indian Express, sir. We are grateful for your time and we are honored to host you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bhattacharya is best known for his term as CMD of Coal India, during which he oversaw Coal India's massively successful IPO in 2010, which remains the largest IPO ever in India. He also led the turnaround of Bharat Coking Coal Limited, bringing the loss-making subsidiary to its first profitable fiscal in 2005-06. Mr. Bhattacharya has documented his 3-decade-long career in India's coal sector in his wonderful book, When Coal Turned Gold. Speaking to Mr. Bhattacharya will be my colleague Karunjit Singh, who covers energy, including coal, for the Indian Express, and who has been reporting on the sector for several years now. We will also take a few questions from the audience after Karunjit and Mr. Bhattacharya have had their explanatory discussion. Today's Explained event is brought to you by our associate partners, Yojana IAS and Pandit Deen Dayal Energy University, Gandhinagar. My thanks to our partners. Welcome, all of you, once again, and we get started now. Karun.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So before we start our conversation with Mr. Bhattacharya, I'll share a few key points with you through a slide about the current power situation and in India's power sector and the importance of coal in India's power sector. So not taking too much time. The first thing is that the coal in India's power sector is a mainstay for power generation. It's the key source of power. It accounts for about 52% of the installed power generation capacity, 54% if you include lignite. And the share of coal in power generation is even higher. Coal alone right now accounting for about 68% of power generation in the country. And the share has actually risen even as the country is giving an increased emphasis to renewables from about 62% in 2019 because of the fact that there's been a sharp uptick in demand and the country has relied on coal-fired power plants to supply this increased energy. Moving on, if we look towards the future, the government is actually planning to shift away from coal as the dominant source of energy, with 52% of installed capacity expected to be from renewable energy, including solar and wind energy. Coal power generation is set to fall to 32.7% from the current levels of 52%, as I mentioned. India will, however, still be looking at coal as the key source of power generation, with 55% of total power still being generated using coal at 2030, according to the CEA. So The global community, however, is looking to end the use of coal. You may have read that at COP26, a number of countries have called for a phasing out of the use of coal for power generation. India's coal sector and power sector currently face a number of structural issues as well. Coal India, which Sir will talk about in great detail, has seen its output stagnate over the past couple of years. Coal India, of course, accounts for a vast majority of coal production in the country, and a number of delays, including delays in obtaining land clearances and forest clearances, have led to production being delayed, a lot of projects being delayed at Coal India. Coal India has also been giving very high dividends to one of the largest shareholders, the government, and its other shareholders, which could also be perhaps playing a role in preventing Coal India from investing adequately in production. Besides this, large dues from power generation companies, which in turn have large dues from discoms, are also a key issue. And the falling PLF at thermal power plants, as the government emphasizes on renewables, could also be affecting the GenCos and therefore Coal India. So that's it from that slide. Now we'll take a conversation to Mr. Partha Bhattacharya. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. So our first question for you would be just on the immediate crisis that we've been witnessing. What are your thoughts? Why did this happen? Why did we suddenly see such a major issue in the power sector with so many thermal power plants not having enough coal to meet the demands of their states?
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to this show. And thanks for your introductory statements. I think you have said it all, not left much to be said. Well, you see, the problem that we have seen this year, sort of coal shortage and a little critical kind of a shortage. During monsoon months, this is not very uncommon. It has happened in the past. What has been different this time are two factors. One factor is the increase in power consumption. Thermal power consumption became very sudden. And 5 to 6% kind of growth is what we have been seeing and what we have been managing over the last so many years. Suddenly we find a 9 to 10% kind of a growth. I mean, it is 17 to 18% over 2019 same period. So that is a little bit of a spike. That is number one. Number two, which is perhaps a bigger problem, I should have said it first, is gradually the country has been depending upon import of coal to a certain extent, to a substantial extent. I would not say very small extent, about 20-25% of the coal usage is imported. And that imported coal prices suddenly shot the roof. Primarily because China was depending more on imported coal. And if China sneezes, the world will have fever. So that kind of a thing. So that let the prices go up the roof. And as a result, the imports that were supposed to come, there was a halt on that. But that also added to the domestic coal demand. And therefore, the demand-supply gap suddenly came up. In addition to that, I would say there are a couple of other reasons. I mean, this is not a thing that has happened just like that. The roots of this were laid down about 3-4 years back. See, first of all, you see, sort of a complacency has set into the sector. The reason being, the thermal power plants have been witnessing PLFs as low as 52, 53, 54%. They were finding it difficult even to service their debts at that kind of PLF. But they had no choice because the renewable were given a priority in offtake. They have a must-take kind of a thing. Power stations were merit order dispatch. And in merit order dispatch, all kinds of interesting things can happen. I mean, an absolutely excellent top-class power station at a distance may not find its place in the merit order system just because of the transport cost. And the Indian transport costs, particularly the railway tariff, are completely out of the system. I mean, it is the highest in the world. And I think we have to live with it for some more time till this passenger subsidization for freight continues. So because of that, there is a bit of a complacency in the thermal power segment. They have continued to work at a low PLF. As a result, they were not particular to pay for coal because they don't need that coal. I mean, coal is being pushed on them. So they don't seem to be very keen on paying for coal in time. And secondly, the stock that they were supposed to maintain, they left it on Coal India. Let the stock be accumulated at the pitch of Coal India. That is the kind of philosophy that I used. On the Coal India side again, with a 1% degrowth for 2 successive years, the coal stock went to record highs. The incremental coal stock in 2020-21 was 25 million, went up from 75 to 100, despite the fact that the company produced 1% less than the previous. Targets are completely out of the way. You don't talk about targets. You just talk about previous year. From that, there is a 1% degrowth, and still the coal stock rises by 25 million tons. So in that kind of a situation, Coal India is neither in a position to enforce cash and carry, nor in a position to bring sense into the whole system. So with all this, there was some sort of a complacency built into the system. And suddenly when a jerk comes, a complacent system takes time to sort of react. So that broadly, I think, is the reason of what happened. But fortunately, the bad period is behind us. The monsoon is over. We are into good months. And the coming 4-5 months are going to be good. They are the best productive months. Already we find that the stocks at powerhouse end. Now actually we should measure the stock at powerhouse, because that is the most critical. So that still remains at somewhere a little above 4 days, little less than 5 days. But still it was 7.2 million tons by the end of September. Now it is a little over 8.1. So it has started on the rise. The slightly, I would say, worrying thing is that we do expect Coal India pitched stocks not to go down any further. I mean, it was 42 million end of September. Today it is 35 million. So 7 million stock drawdown has happened in October. That should get arrested. Then only you get a little bit of a comfort that, okay, we should be able to. In fact, November it should get arrested, and from December it should build on. So that by March, etc., we may not go back to 100 million ton, but we should have something like 60 million ton to take care of the monsoon next year.
Right.
There will be a drawdown at that. Right. So this is the broad situation, and we do hope that the international scenario will also change over a period of time, and the imported coal, which is sort of a no-no at this point in time, will not remain so. So certain amount of imported coal will come. The other another source that we can think of is the commercial miners, but they are not going to come so fast. They have been allotted blocks just about 2 years back. But at least those who are in the captive segment, they can produce little more, because the government has allowed them to sell now in the market 50%. Although their total production, what they do is minuscule, not much, 50-60 million tons, 66 million tons. And that is required for their own consumption. So how much they can produce more and sell in the market is anybody's guess. So that may not be a big source. But by and large, we should not be revisiting a situation where there is a widespread darkness in the country and things like that. There could be some problem somewhere, particularly if the payment are not made. Because you see, Coal India will definitely now insist on supplying to those who pay. So as long as payments are forthcoming, supply should not be a problem. And as and when opportunity comes, the power station should follow the stock norms that has been prescribed by the Central Electricity Authority, which is from 15 days to 30 days.
So, sir, as you mentioned, I mean, a complacency is kept up in the system. And this is not something which we are seeing, which is new. As you said, the lower stocks around the monsoon, just after the monsoon, is not a new thing. Do you think there is some, I won't say blame, but some responsibility on the part of the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission and the state regulators to actually require them, or to impose this stock requirement a little bit more stringently, to ensure that thermal power plants are actually building up the required levels of stock for the monsoon when they inevitably do fall somewhat?
I think even more than that, if I may say so, I would say that please see that coal is kept within the energy narrative. Last 3 years, we didn't hear about coal. While coal continues to be very important, but we are hearing only renewable. So the renewable story was so deeply engulfed that it threw coal out of the narrative. And that is the problem that has come. So nobody was looking at it. So suddenly everybody has started looking at it. This is not required.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to really talk about coal all the time, but you need to take care of the things that, I mean, the right things are happening, the right kind of processes are happening. See, that is, there are several agencies who can look into that. For example, CA is prescribing the number of days stock. CA may have a regulatory mechanism to see that that particular stock is maintained, because the power stations, as far as I understand, the tariff is built considering the working capital requirement for building that stock. So that is already there. I mean, so why should they not keep the stock? Then they should pay for coal in time. I mean, it's basically a cash and carry system. Just because coal is more easily available and you don't need that coal, still it is being thrust on you, so hence you decide not to pay. That is also not a very favorable kind of thing. So the payment chain has to be proper. That will, of course, at the end, it will require discount reports. I mean, it's tagged up with there. The discoms should be able to realize the market price for whatever power they sell. And whosoever needs to be subsidized, that should be subsidized from the state budget. As long as we don't move into this kind of a model, I think the problem in some form or other will keep on coming.
Right. So, moving on a little bit to CIL, you've written for us also that CIL has performed admirably in boosting supply to meet the demand of thermal power plants during this coal crisis. But CIL has, of course, as you mentioned, been facing a stagnation in output. What are the key causes of it? You mentioned lower offtake, of course, but are there other also causes, pushing CIL to not meet its long-term target or of FY24 of reaching 1 billion tons? And while you get to that, before maybe even you get to that, if you could give us a little bit of context about Coal India. As you said, we haven't been paying enough attention to coal, so therefore not paying enough attention to Coal India, and it's the key role it plays in India's power sector. So just a little bit of a background on Coal India.
Okay. See, the point here is that the demand of coal for power stations, that is very critically determined by one factor. If you just keep a watch on one factor, you can have a handle of the demand, and that is PLF, the average PLF of the country. Now, that average PLF is languishing at 50 to 53% for the last 3 years. And no sensible effort has been made to improve it. Although the improvement of PLF has at least 5 or 6 great positive consequences. Number one, it makes the GenCos financially stable. It's in a position to do debt servicing and keep some margins, etc. Second, that is very important. The incremental power, for that, the cost that you incur is only the variable cost of coal. So that is the cheapest source of coal in the country. And by not allowing the PLF to increase, we are not tapping into the cheapest source. And this actually should be able to address the affordability issue. If you consider that affordability is a critical issue in the whole power sector, because we don't have consumers who have really a very high, it is one of the low per capita income countries in the world. So their affordability is definitely critical. If you think that, then keeping the PLF of existing power plants as high as possible should be one of the things that we should consider. And it used to be 80%. 79-80% was what we have seen in 2007-8. Now it has dropped. You have created capacities. More capacities have been created, you're not utilizing them. So as a result, you are actually denying yourself the low-cost power into the whole system. So that is the second. Third, of course, is for every 1% improvement increase in average PLF in the country, the coal demand raises by 10 million tons. So if you actually see what has happened during this part, that 51 has now risen to 58. So the 7% increase means on an annualized basis, the 70 million ton of extra demand has been added. And that is throwing everything out of me. That's because we have not really prepared for it. If the PLF levels are high, then the possibility of a jerk in demand is low. But at a 51% PLF level, if there is a demand in the country, suddenly it will go to 61 and you will have 100 million tons of extra demand. That point has to be kept in mind. So one has to prepare for that. So I think the most important thing is that the coal companies will have to have adequate extra capacity built into the system. They have some capacity. They can move certain things. Like, for example, when the demand was low, actually they did, and that's the reason they have been able to manage this particular thing. They actually did advanced stripping of overburden. So they did more of overburden, exposed certain amount of coal, kept it exposed, didn't produce, but they could fall back upon that coal during this crisis. As a result, you see that they have been able to achieve an offtake growth of about 19% over last year. Drawn from stock as well as from production. About 15-16 million tons of extra production has happened during this period as compared to last year. And this is not the period where growth is achieved, because these are all monsoon months, COVID, second phase, and all kinds of things. So I wouldn't say that in a normal year you would have, or rather in this particular year, it is very normal to achieve a growth of 16-17 million tons during this period. But it has achieved because of the action that it took place. So there are certain things that it can do, but that is up to a certain extent.
Right.
So I think that is what is required. I mean, Coal India's preparedness have to be more. There has to be clearances have to be faster because a lot of projects are pending for this clearance, that clearance, land acquisition, and all that. All those processes must be made faster. And as Mr. Sarup sometimes keeps on saying, and I completely agree with him, they did really a fantastic job in 2014-15 by coordinating with the state governments, having meetings at the state capitals instead of at Delhi. And as a result, there was a speed and momentum put into that. I think maybe a repeat of that would make things faster. And now we have the other segment, commercial mining, which was not there any time in the past. So speed it up. If we can speed it up, then I think we should not be required to revisit this kind of a problem after 3-4 years.
Right. Great, sir. So, if you could, as I asked, give a little bit of a primer, of background of Coal India, which is so important for our country.
Okay, yeah, that is a very favorite topic of mine. I would love to talk on that, but put me under check whenever you feel that I'm running out of time. So you see, it's very interesting to note that Coal India was formed in a very, very peculiar circumstances. How was Coal India formed? I mean, there was a major oil price hike in 1970s, early 70s. That threw the balance of payments out of the gear. We were not having this kind of forex reserves at that time, so it was a very terrible kind of reform. So a high-powered energy committee was appointed to examine what should India do as far as energy is concerned. And that was the first time when coal was identified as a mainstay of energy in this country for the foreseeable future. That's how coal came into the forefront. That time, the growth of coal sector was less than 2% per annum. And the reason for that was there was no investments. And the reason for no investment was that it was not at all remunerative to invest. So there was no investment. Faced with that kind of a situation, the government had two decisions to make. One was to increase the price of coal and make it remunerative. But coal during those days was a domestic fuel. So the impact of price increase would have been widespread. And government didn't want to affect the purses of so many people. So the only other option was to fund from the national exchange for the time. And that is how nationalization was carried out. Though there are two other reasons also. One is safety of workers was given a go-by by the private miners. So that was one important point that was tackled. And the second was slaughter mining, the unscientific mining done by the private owners. All these factors led to nationalization. And government started pumping in money. The best thing that happened is that Coal India started moving into uncharted territories, virgin areas, opening up new mines, greenfield projects. All these things happened with the government support, which continued for about 15 years, 16 years, from 75 to 91, let us say. And that reversed the growth rate from less than 2% to plus 5%. So we achieved whatever was mandated to be done. The production increased from about 77, 78 million tons at the time of nationalization to 178 million tons in 1991. So that was a start. But because of the fact that prices were not revised regularly, and running the things commercially was not the main thing. Main thing was coal at any cost. You have to grow. So therefore, there was serious balance sheet problems. There was a huge accumulated loss in the balance sheet. By 91, we had eroded 40% of the equity. And there was a large overdue liabilities to the government of more than 2,200 crores. That is when the new government, the economic reform started. And the government decided to have an arm's length distance with all the PSUs, including Coal India. So the budgetary support was gradually phased out. And they wanted Coal India to become self-reliant. So at that point in time, the company carried out very interesting kind of internal reforms. I don't want to go through all that. But because of those reforms, the company emerged strong. Without government support, the company could manage. The company brought down the losses. In fact, rather moved into profit right from 91, 92. And since then, it has been always profitable, except for 1 year when there was a wage increase impact. So that happened. We approached the government for a review of the loan overdues, loan and interest overdues. We got the capital restructuring done in 96. We approached the World Bank for a large sectoral loan of $1 billion to fund 24 excellent projects, coal projects. We got that through. So because of that, Coal India came back into stream, and then the profitability, production growth, etc., started happening quite well. So this is basically the turnaround of the company during the 90s. Thereafter, of course, the company gained strength from time to time. I mean, it became a Mini Ratna in 2007, then got into Navaratna in 2008, and finally did the great IPO in 2010 and got the Maharatna in 2011. So in a span of just 4.5 years, it got through all the Ratna categories. So I think it has a company, it's a company with a great inner strength. Internal strengths are very high. It has to only be guided properly so that it produces results which are best for the government.
Absolutely, sir. That's a fascinating overview of CIL. But as you mentioned, I mean, it's a great company which has been giving high dividends to the government, servicing its debt on time. What is ailing CIL right now? So there were a number of issues. We see CIL diversifying into certain areas which may seem unrelated, like fertilizers, diversifying away from its core business into solar. We've also seen some issues around appointments of the CMD. There being interim CMDs for a period of time after Mr. Sutirtha Bhattacharya demitted office, and even interim appointments at some key subsidiaries, Bharat Coking Coal being one of them. So, what is ailing CIL right now? What are the issues CIL is facing right now?
Okay, let me take the issues one by one. These are a combination of complex issues and quite different from each other. The first issue that you mentioned is what was the first issue?
The fact that CIL is diversifying into other sectors.
Yeah, diversifying. You see, if the demand from power sector is not going to come up, we have seen that for the last 3 years. This year is different. Last 3 years, that was the situation. It's not going to come up. And the company has to grow. Company has to grow. So then where does that coal go? So that is one question. So that for that coal to be used effectively, one way could be coal carbonation. I mean, coal gasification or things like that, alternative use of it. We have always considered coal as a fuel for power sector. We have never considered the feedstock character of it. The coal can also be a feedstock for producing chemicals, fertilizers, ammonia. These kind of things have never occurred to us because we are very strongly married to the power sector. Now that marriage is breaking loose, power has other partners, renewables are coming in. Okay, so therefore coal has an opportunity, and coal is looking at other sectors, other kind of avenues. I think that is the right thing to do for India. Well, but at the same time, whether it is unrelated, fertilizer I won't say is unrelated because coal to chemicals, coal to ammonia, and ammonia to fertilizer is the normal kind of a thing. China does it in a big way. South Africa, Sasol does it from coal to chemicals and all those things. So there are precedences in the world where this is done, and it's a good thing to do because all these items are input dependent. We are dependent on input for ammonia or for methanol or for the other things. We depend on imports. So anything that you do is actually going to use coal quite effectively. So that part is all right. Also, I would say solar. Solar is not a solar is for everybody. Solar is anybody can get into solar, and solar is definitely a complement to energy. This is also energy. That's also energy. So as coal gets phased out, I mean, it will definitely eventually get phased out. So the company will not get phased out. The company will have to continue as long as foreseeable future. So therefore, company will have to take a strategy of diversifying into various areas which are not unrelated, at the same time which makes sense, where you have returns and where you can build core competence, because the company must develop core competence in anything that it does. Today, its core competence is in mining, but it is not difficult to acquire core competence once you decide to go into that sector. So I think the company is making these kind of moves, and maybe that is not wrong. I don't say it is wrong, given the fact that the demand of coal from power sector may not continue to grow like this, and there are, because of renewable coming in and because of also this commercial miners coming in, they are also a source of coal. So Coal India will have to take its own strategy of diversification. But certainly, I mean, it should not diversify into completely unrelated sectors. That is nobody's point. Now, coming to the money part, you see, you have to think that way, this way, that if you don't have investment options or investment opportunities, you can't create capacities just like that, only if there is no demand. Then creation of that capacity, that cost becomes a sunk cost, for at least for some time, till the demand materializes. So, and Coal India is a reasonably debt-free kind of a company, and it has immense debt contracting capacity. So if it wants to do something fast, it can always contract debt. So during that period, what do you do with the resources that you generate? Now, resources are generated for the shareholders. The biggest shareholder is the government. So government takes a call that it wants to use this money for doing something. You can't always say no. But at the same time, if you have clear plans of investing money in your projects, definitely you should put it up to the government that these are the plans, and please give this amount of internal resources for this plan. So that internal resources plus certain amount of debt should be able to finance those projects. Rest the government can take. That should be the broad framework. I don't think that CIL has really suffered very heavily because of money being taken out. But at the same time, the dividend payouts has to be within the norms of the company law. You have distributable profit. It cannot be more than the distributable profits for a year. The payout ratio should be reasonable.
Yeah.
On one side, if you are giving a target of the company growing to 1 billion ton, you should leave some money, even if the company doesn't have clear plans for that. So these things taken together, there may be some scope of adjustment, some scope of better visualization, but that can happen even now.
Right.
It is not that something very drastic has happened and the company has lost great opportunities. It's not really like
that. Right. So, sir, one thing that you touched upon a little bit was the issue of declining PLFs and the fact that solar and wind capacity is seen as must run. So could you and let me clarify for our audience. I mean, PLF being plant load factor for thermal power plants. So, for example, if a plant is at 50% PLF, it is only giving an output of 50% of its full rated capacity, which say for whatever megawatts it is. So obviously, lower PLF means the plant is using less coal, generating less power, and obviously can lead to financial distress for the plant if it's not able to recoup its costs. So you mentioned the issue of low PLFs. Could this, as you mentioned in your book, possibly lead to our thermal generation companies getting into possibly financial distress, making us more dependent on renewable in a manner which is too fast? And could it increase the cost of power for the larger number of consumers that we want to bring power to in India, as our power consumption is also set to grow?
I think this is a very interesting question, and let me take this question like this. You see, India is a country where the per capita power consumption and the per capita income both are one of the lowest. Not only the developed world, but even the developing world. I mean, like for example, China is 3 times our number in terms of per capita consumption of power. Now, as India develops, the two factors that will definitely go for a change. One is the per capita consumption of power. Today it is 1,200 units. China is more than 3,000. Average of the world is more than 3,000. So it is one of the lowest. So this will have to increase. Now, when this increases, multiplied by the 1.37 billion population that we have, you can imagine the additional power, how much it will be required. That cannot be made by renewable. You cannot meet that you cannot create renewable capacity to meet the incremental power demand arising from improvement in the lifestyles. That means improvement in per capita consumption that you cannot meet. So you have to use coal for quite some time. Even the CAs, one of the studies I was seeing that they are envisaging 66 gigawatt more coal-based capacity in 2030. Although they are also saying that the renewable capacity will grow by 320%. From 100 it will go to 420. But coal will also go up. That is the balanced mix, optimal mix. The only issue is that coal power or thermal power is witnessing so many headwinds. The headwinds you have to take a close look at. Is so much of headwinds really required? Are we trying to kill it? If you don't want to kill it, then you have to sort of, smoothen the headwinds. The first headwind, there is a 400 rupees per ton of GST compensation cess on coal, whether domestic or imported. And that straight away translates into 25 paisa in terms of power unit. So coal power becomes costlier to that extent. Then the kind of railway tariff that we have is unheard of in any other country. In terms of rupees per ton kilometer, Indian railway freight is one of the highest. So any power station which is not at pithead is suffered, has to suffer. And there is a huge load of the kind of expenses. And these expenses are all fixed in rupees per ton. So if the quality of coal is low in rupees per kilocalorie, this becomes even higher. So any power station at a distance, and we have some excellent power stations with the best quality, the best technologies, but at a distance. So they immediately lose out on merit order system. So this merit order system has to also review. There is a need for reviewing that, and we should ensure that these power plants also are able to operate at a decent PLF. We should stipulate some sort of a minimum PLF at which the plants can run viably. They can be happy. So something like maybe 60-65%, something like that, we should be able to achieve in the thermal power sector, and not allow it to fall below that. Like you have must take kind of a thing for solar, you should have a threshold PLF that should not be allowed to go below this. Provided, of course, it doesn't have inefficiencies. You take out the inefficient power stations. We should phase out the inefficient power stations, but the good power stations that have come, maybe because they have come at a distance, they are becoming they're now not finding a place in the merit order system. They should be allowed to generate and produce.
Right.
So creating capacities, capital assets, and not allowing them to function, I think India cannot afford.
So, very fascinating analysis there, sir. We're getting a lot of questions in the Q&A chat. So, even before we go to the questions which will be coming through video, I'll just share some of these. I will take two in this go. The first from Kishore Kavadia, who's basically raised the issue of CIL not investing enough to reduce its carbon footprint. So, in a related manner, I'd like to ask, should CIL be looking at carbon capture to reduce its carbon footprint, make coal-based power, uh, promote, invest in carbon capture, sell that technology, do something about that to make coal a more palatable solution for the international community. And secondly, underground mining. I know Coal India is focused on open cast mining, away from underground mining in the early 2000s, late 90s. So, is there any work being done to get latest technology to do underground mining as well at Coal India to boost production?
Both the questions are very relevant and very important. I must appreciate that. You see, first of all, the carbon footprint. The best thing that Coal India can do is to help or support low emission power generation. For that, what it should be doing is washing its coal. And today we don't have the washeries of the Easter years where huge amount of water consumption would be involved. Today we have best-in-class washeries where water consumption is just incremental. The initial water you put in, and then you require only to just some incremental top-up type of water is required. And per ton of coal wash, the water requirement is as small, very small numbers. They are power efficient, water efficient, yield efficient. These technologies have already come. So we should try to promote these technologies, and some of the washeries are being built up in Mahanadi coalfields based on this kind of technology. They should come in a big way. But for that, it is both the consumer and the producer, both have to. The consumer will have to demand wash, and producer will have to provide wash. I don't see either. Neither the producer, okay, MCL is doing something fine. The producer is not very keen to wash its coal because it's getting paid for whatever it supplies. And the power stations, the power plants, I must say that they have done a great job by having boiler designed to burn any kind of coal. But instead of that, if they would have also focused on better quality of coal. They've asked for better quality and they've asked for washing. You see, in India, if you want better quality and you don't want washing, it is just it doesn't happen like that. Because mostly open cast coal, and that too, basic quality of coal is bad, poor. We don't have too much of good coal. So with open cast mining, that coal becomes further bad. So washing is the only solution, and power stations must ask for washing. Producer must do the washing. And how does it get paid for? The whole problem has been who will pay the cost of washing. That's a useless question to ask. Actually, washing, if it leads to quality improvement, the difference in the quality of washed coal and the raw coal should be good enough in terms of price to pay for washing. CL should have good incentive to even that is what happens internationally. If you look at the prices of Indian coal, unfortunately, if you convert the prices from rupees per ton to rupees per GCal, the energy terms, the prices are flat over the entire range. 5,500 or 3,200, all coal prices in rupees per GCal is the same. That's not the situation worldwide. There's a steep rise. So therefore, there is an incentive for supplying good quality coal. There is a disincentive for supplying bad quality. In the Indian context, neither of those holds. The power stations are paying, unfortunately, too high for lower grade coal and too low for higher grade. So that has to change. The pricing pattern needs to be properly evaluated so that inbuilt incentives are created. If nobody pays for the cost of washing, just the producer bears the cost and he gives washed coal, gets a better price. And that covers his cost of washing. That is what it should be. So if washing can be promoted by an approach, a sort of a collaborative approach between the power stations and the coal companies, I think one major step towards carbon footprint would be taken. Okay, but in the absence of that, what else can Coal India do? I think what Coal India does is very, very suboptimal. It is moving high ash coal through railway system, long distances. That's completely a wastage. That is again a footprint which it could be avoided through washing. So I think that is one question. Now coming to the underground mining. See, underground mining, unfortunately, our geomining conditions are not such which can, which can encourage intensive underground mining. Underground mining has to be productive. It has to be mechanized and intensive, which means basically long wall systems. Now, for long wall systems, you require the coal seam to be absolutely consistent for a long period and for a long distance. Few kilometers, the coal seam should go straight. Unfortunately, we have too many faults. We have either after some distance, we'll encounter either a up through or a down through. And at that point of time, that particular highly expensive long wall machine will get stuck for a couple of months before you can negotiate that. This is something which reduces the productivity, and therefore we couldn't deploy the highly productive long wall technology in a big way here. The only technology that has been used to some extent is continuous miners. But on the other side also, because of the demand in power capacity going up and demand of coal going up, open cast has been the easier solution. That also I must confess. So open casting has allowed Coal India to provide that extra coal over all these years. And if you did a focus more on underground, that would have been very difficult.
Right. So coming back to CIL for a moment, I think we skipped over this question. The issue that of leadership, you mentioned that Coal India needs to do something like push coal washing and maybe even need to lobby the government to try to create some regulations around that, because of course, as you said, transporting high ash coal is not benefiting anyone. Do you think the fact that Coal India and subsidiaries have had interim heads for long periods, has that slowed down decision making? Does it also impact what the kind of transition that you're talking about, investments that Coal India has to do potentially in transitioning and even maybe boosting production if it's going to meet that 1 billion target? Do you think that, by the way, that 1 billion ton target from the current level of around 600 billion tons for our viewers, is that a target that Coal India is still looking at, even given the fact, as we mentioned, that demand for coal from power plants is not as high as what we would expect?
Well, if you talk about Coal India achieving 1 billion ton, or whether it should continue to pursue that kind of a target, I feel that the coal demand will actually definitely grow from the current levels. As I said, we are going to have another 60 gigawatt of thermal power stations. So from the power side and from industry side, it's going to grow. But then we have two other sources. One is the commercial miners. They will come up. And to the best of my knowledge or whatever reports I've seen, their capacity, when everyone comes up, is going to be somewhere around 375 million tons or so. So if that 375, and they will produce 375, the capacity is 375, they will normally produce 375 or maybe 350, something like that. If that comes, Coal India, whether it will have a scope of producing up to 1 billion ton and then 1 billion plus 350 will get, that demand will be of that level. Unless, of course, coal gasification, etc., also comes up by that time, is an open question. So, considering that, I think, and the way Coal India has been moving, I think 7 to 8% growth in a year is the best it can think of achieving. So, today's production is 600 million tons, so maybe 40, 50 million tons kind of increase if it achieves. That should suffice, complemented by the production growth that is likely to happen from 2 years from now or 3 years from now from the private commercial miners. So then in that case, 1 billion will be much later, not the 2024 we are talking about. So that is one part. Now coming to the succession planning, you see, this is not a very unique problem. Sometimes it has happened for too long a period. One subsidiary is completely there, and big subsidiaries, if they are without a head, it has a problem. But what happens is, in such cases, normally Coal India spares one of its directors who is given an additional charge. And the directors of Coal India are actually of the same level as the CMDs. And if they are given additional charge of that particular subsidiary, they do the job. It's not that it is uncared for and nobody is looking at it. But definitely it's a full-time role. I mean, a full-time role given to somebody who has an additional charge will not see the same kind of delivery. But it is not that it will be completely parentless kind of a situation. That is the advantage of having this Coal India kind of a system, you know. But unfortunately, the process is quite a long process. You have to process the applications. The applications will get reviewed, and then it will go to the PSB. PSB will have to interview. After the interview, then they select somebody. Then there is a various levels of clearances, and then the orders are out. So it takes some time, and sometimes, normally what it should be is that before 1 year before the vacancy arises, the process should start. That is that's also prescribed. I mean, that is also mentioned. But for various reasons, that doesn't happen. Sometimes the person retires, and even after that, the process starts. To the extent possible, this should be avoided. We should start the process as early as possible. And there has been times where PSB has been very, very doggedly after this, and they maintained the calendar. They got the orders issued even before the vacancy arises. That has happened in the past. It can again happen, but it definitely requires that a very serious intervention on the part of the concerned departments of the government.
Right. So, speaking more broadly again about the power sector for a moment, the government had, a couple of years ago, asked thermal power plants to substitute imported coal with the domestic coal, again putting the onus on Coal India to produce more coal to feed that demand. Do you think that actually put us maybe in a slightly more adverse position now, with the government now asking, just as the power demand was really high, suggesting that these plants could use a 10% blend of imported coal to meet their demand? Do you think this kind of breaks of relationships that some power plants might have with coal suppliers abroad, does this kind of policy dilly-dallying or changing your mind impact the power sector negatively, do you think?
Well, I take this question a little differently, because here I must bring up a structural issue that has impacted the whole system quite a bit. You see, Coal India, after nationalization, was providing coal to power stations. It was growing at the rate the power stations needed, and there was no problem. But when the economic reform started, one of the sectors that was taken up for, one of the real sectors that was taken up for reform was also the power sector. So all kinds of new things were thought about there. I mean, private-public partnership, government giving guarantees and things like that. And so there was a study done by the government that if the power sector accelerates its capacity addition program, will Coal India be in a position to meet the demand? Particularly because the budgetary support of Coal India is going to be taken away. And the study conclusion was very clear that Coal India will not be able to meet the demand of the power sector if there is an acceleration like that. Particularly because after the budgetary support was phased out, Coal India stopped getting into virgin fields. They were only expanding by the side of their own business, adjacent to their operations. It was all brownfield expansion mostly. So this was the conclusion. That conclusion led to the Coal Mines Nationalization Act being amended in 1993, where something like 200 odd blocks were taken away from Coal India, about 28 billion tons, and allotted to the captive block allotted. It was only for captive mining, mining for the end users. So that didn't yield the result. 28 billion tons should produce 500 million tons annually. So that has never happened. But the 28 billion tons is gone out of Coal India. So that production has never happened. So this has led to a clear gap between the production capacity in the country and the demand.
Right.
Now, in 2007, fortunately, the power stations for the next 15 years, from 1992 to 2007, they didn't get their act together. So they were actually going slow on capacity addition, and Coal India was meeting the demand. But 11th plan period, 2007 onwards, they scaled up to about 3 times. At that time, that was the time when actually commercial mining should have come. If commercial mining should have been in place by 2007, then you would never have seen any import of coal for thermal power or, any gap between supply and demand. The whole problem would not have been. We missed the bus at that time. So what we missed at that time, we got done in 2020, which was 13 years late.
Right.
So that is the reason of a structural difference. A company, whatever may be the size, cannot meet the demand of a complex country like India. The largest coal company in China, which is China Shenhua, it meets 9% of that country's demand. And here we are doing 80%. You can't rely on one player. So that over-dependence on Coal India has been the historical fallout of decisions not being taken in time. And, we are somewhat suffering. But I must say that, rectifying decisions have also been taken now. So hopefully in 3-4 years' time, that problem will be out of us.
Right. Fascinating analysis, sir. Now, I think we should take some questions from the audience as well before we come back to some other questions that I also have. First up, we have Mr. Swadeep Kumar from our associate partner Yojana AS who would like to ask the question. Mr. Kumar, are you there? Could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Good evening, sir. My question is this: has coal mining reduced compared to earlier? If so, what would be its impact on employment, economy, and energy security?
I didn't get the first sentence of yours. Can you repeat that?
Mr. Kumar, could you repeat that?
Repeat
Yes,
the first
yes.
sentence.
Has coal mining reduced compared to earlier?
No, it hasn't.
If so, what would be its impact on employment, economy, and energy security?
No, coal mining has not reduced.
Okay.
For the last 3 years, Coal India was stagnant, but it has never reduced. It has always grown. You see, we were 77 million tons when the company was formed in 1975. Now we are at 600 plus. So it has only grown. There has been no reduction. But yes, employment has definitely come down because Coal India initially was doing most of the mining through underground. And many of the mines were very low productive, non-mechanized mines. So those mines have been gradually are being phased out. And as a result, manpower is getting lesser. So for example, in the last 10 years, the manpower has gone down by 40%, but the production has gone up by 40%. So that is what has happened. I mean, yes, employment-wise, it is going down. And the reason for that was that the company was having overemployment at the time of nationalization. It was suffering from a problem of a bloated workforce.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar, for your question. We have another question from the audience. We have Mr. Amitav Datta, formerly of NTPC and Tata Power, currently a consultant, who's also got a question for you, sir. Mr. Datta, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
My question is, one question he has already told, that is the import and not to import directives are changing time to time. That he has already asked. And another question is related to that. When the mines are declared with some grade and they cannot maintain the grade, so this is a huge slippage which ultimately gives a bad coal to the powerhouse. At the same time, suppose one grade slippage can lower the GCV, say 5 to 10%. So your production will also need to be increased. So two types of problems are coming. You cannot manage your production because you have planned with some grade. Now your consumption is actually with some grade.
Yeah, a good question. You see, basically, as I mentioned, grade slippage is a quality slippage. And in order to ensure that quality slippage doesn't happen, that is the right thing to do. I mean, if a coal is of a certain grade and it has been analyzed to be of that grade, So then there is no reason why there should be any slippage if mining is properly done and beneficiation is properly done. So basically, the consumers and producers should collaborate with each other to ensure that coal is washed. If coal is washed, then question of any grade slippage will not arise, and that is the right thing to do. Without washing, whatever you may do, because of the inherently poor quality coal that we have, and because of the type of mining that we do, quality deterioration will happen. Maybe one grade, maybe two grades, whatever it is. So the best way to stop that is to press for coal washing. And you please tell everybody that we are not going to pay for the cost of washing. You price your product in such a manner that you realize whatever is the washing cost. I mean, that is your business.
Right. Absolutely, sir. Sir, we'll take one more question before we get to a question that I have. A question from Ms. Darshana Vyas, Senior Account Director at Kechan Sampark. Could you please unmute yourself, ma'am, and ask your question? Hello. Could you please?
Hello, sir.
Yeah. Please ask your question.
Yes. Thank you, Karanjeet, and thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya. I wanted to ask, how do you think India fares in coal production and the types of usage compared to other developing and developed nations?
How does coal production?
Yeah, how do you think India fares in coal production and types of usage compared to other developing and developed nations?
Maybe if you could just say a little bit about the quality of coal in India, sir, and of course you said the importance of washing it, why that is, and relative to other coal producing countries.
You see, in other coal producing countries, I mean, India is today at number 3. I think US is still the number 2 in terms of production, but in terms of consumption, we may be number 2. It is a large coal producing country, no doubt, but the average coal quality is poor, and we have a problem with the quality. That part is sure. I mean, the other countries, coal production, the coal quality is somewhat better, and normally coal is washed. So there is definitely an improvement. A little better quality is what they. For example, imported coal you have better in terms of sizing as well as quality consistency. Whatever they promise, they will normally deliver very close to that. That is not the case with us because we have not gone in for large scale washing, which we should do. So that is one. But otherwise, in terms of cost, for example, we are definitely one of the best, because you see the price of coal in India, if you compare with imported price or any other price, even in rupees per kilocalorie, is at a huge discount of something like 50 to 60%. Today it may be even 70%. It has been always at a deep discount to international prices, not in rupees per tonne, but in rupees per kilocalories or rupees per GK. So the price-wise, cost-wise, we are low cost. Our prices are low, but quality definitely there is a big scope of improvement. That is broadly the situation. Did I answer your question?
I think they're no longer with us, but I think you have, sir. So moving to a question that I have. So you're obviously a larger question about the power sector. The DISCOM reform scheme that the government has come out with is about 3 lakh crore rupees. And what do you think will be its impact overall on the power sector? Of course, the DISCOMs being the source of money which goes to GenCos and their ability to pay Coal India, of course. As we know, we might have mentioned in the slide that the receivables of Coal India have been rising from GenCos. They're obviously stressed because of a non-payment of dues by DISCOMs. Do you think this new scheme, after Uday, this scheme would actually be able to make a change in the power sector, make it more viable for both GenCos, DISCOMs, and Coal India?
See, I wish it did, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, is it basically a one-time kind of a solution? There is no one-time solution. The problem is recurring. The problem has to have a recurring solution. The only solution is that the DISCOMs should be able to fetch a market-determined price for the power that they supply to anyone, and the price should be the same. Maybe some categorization, industry, commerce, domestic, that part can be there, but no sector should be supplied power below cost, right, and it should have the right to realize that. Now, if there is a class of consumers who deserve subsidy, according to the perception of the particular government, that should get directly funded. We should introduce DBT, direct benefit transfer, in such cases, and relieve the DISCOMs to charge normal market-related prices. If that happens, short of that, I don't think anything else will have a permanent solution. Uday was not that. That's why I didn't see the solution. Even earlier, when we did securitization in 2003, 2004, that time 2002, that also didn't solve the problem because we attempted a one-time solution to a recurring problem. That doesn't work. So it has to have a recurring solution.
Right. Just to set some context for what Sir has mentioned, our DISCOMs, of course, charge different rates to different types of consumers. Rural and agricultural consumers and rural residential consumers paying far less, sometimes getting free power also, with commercial industrial consumers paying far higher to basically cross-subsidize other consumers. So Sir is mentioning that this issue will probably continue to recur because of this issue. Now, we'll go to another audience question, this time from Mr. Yatish Kumar, from a GGM at ONGC. I think we've addressed a part of his question already about coal quality, but I think he can share something about the issue for power plants and supply chain management in terms of quantity. Mr. Kumar, could you please unmute yourself and share your question? Mr. Kumar? I think Mr. Kumar might not be there.
He's there.
Oh, he's there. Yeah. So
Hello. Hello.
Please ask your question, sir.
Yes, sir. My major question was, the major part has already been covered by the honorable former CNMD, and it is mostly. I mean to say that regulatory mechanism is in place. Technology initiatives have already been taken up. These are in place by the CIL, but still, the quality of the coal is a matter of concern, and ultimate end user is suffering because the loss accruals on account of poor quality of the coal are passed on the end users only. And this is a matter of concern to the end users. So unless until these companies, the end user is suffering. So I think the basic or the this concept of the formation of the PSUs like CIL is a failure. Because here the oil, all the companies' energy consumption is by the end users. The power generation agencies are not producing for themselves.
Right.
End user is suffering. So I am just requesting you whether any structural changes will take place. Because as on date, it is the quality control is at the source of the coal production, not at the consumption point. So why not regulation at the consumption point? So that at least power generation companies cannot make a vague claim that the quality of the coal is poor and hence the cost is more and they are passing the charges to the consumer.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar, sir.
You're absolutely right. In fact, that is the point that I was trying to hint at. What needs to happen is, looking at the kind of coal that we have inherently bad quality. Our coal is not of good quality. And we are doing open cast mining. Open cast mining will leave some amount of scope of contamination. So the only manner in which quality can be ensured is to go for large scale washing. Washing is the only solution. Now, when we talked about washing in the past, always what happened was there was a debate as to who will bear the washing cost. In my view, it is the producer who has to bear the washing cost for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. It is producers' responsibility to provide quality coal. So they have to bear the cost. But at the same time, nothing is free. There is no free lunch. So therefore, the pricing of coal, grade-wise pricing of coal, has to be maintained in such a manner that the difference in price between high-grade coal and low-grade coal, I mean, by washing, you are creating high-grade coal. That price and the low-grade coal that you are inputting into the washery, the difference should be able to pay for the washing cost, as simple as that. So when we try to do that, there is a resistance from the consuming sector. The problem is there. And consuming sector is quite strong. I mean, power sector, including the MOP and everybody is very strong. So the best that they could agree at one point of time in 2012, when coal prices were converted into GCV content, I mean, related to GCV content, all that they agreed was in rupees per tonne for higher GCV, it will be proportionately higher. So what I mean to say is the rupees per ton curve will be linearly moving upwards. Now, if rupees per ton moves linearly upward, then rupees per GCal, when you transfer the price into energy parameters, it will become flat. Now, if the price is flat, that means low quality, high quality price, rupees per GCal is the same. This will never allow quality improvement. There cannot be any quality. And on the top of that, both railway freight and the 400 rupees of GST compensation cess, these two are also fixed in rupees per ton, which means in rupees per GCal it is sloping downwards. So the destination price is higher for low grade coal and lower for high grade coal. If you want to change that, then the power sector and the producers have to collaborate and change the pricing structure. That is the only thing that can be done to force coal washing at the producer side.
Right. Absolutely, sir. I think we've covered this quite a bit, the importance of coal washing and bringing up the quality of coal. A question from Mr. Vikas Singh. Now, he's not with us on video, but he shared his question with us earlier. He's with Intercontinental Consultants and Technocrats. So he basically brings up the question that the only large-scale solution for electric energy for India is nuclear energy. And this the fact, and I'm just adding on to this, this was thought to be in the past a key part of our power mix, something that would make India energy independent, but now it seems the thrust on nuclear is all but lost, especially after the Fukushima disaster. What are your thoughts as somebody who is dealt with government, probably still has strong links with the government? What are the thoughts around nuclear energy and the future in India?
See, what this current crisis has taught us, I mean, the current crisis has happened not only in India, China, it has happened in Europe and every other country. That I think there is an importance to have a diversified source of power. And it should be as diversified as possible. So in that context, I would say that nuclear also should find a place. See, more the diversity, more you can manage your crisis. Your crisis management capability increases. So from that perspective, I should say that nuclear should be there. But beyond that, I don't know the subject, so I don't want to venture.
Right. Another question, and I'll also add on to this one from Mr. Bhavani Pani from Span Resources, managing partner there, that basically alluding to the international pressures on coal. He says that rich, low population density countries can afford to stay away from coal, but countries like India, China cannot. And to this point, I'd like to just ask, I mean, you are well known for making a strong case for Coal India, in its IPO internationally to the international community. It was massively a popular IPO. Could you sell now India's plans to continue using coal? How would you market that and say that, India still needs to continue using coal to meet its power demand? India is developing, and as you said, India's power consumption per capita is still very low. How would you market that?
Well, I'm no longer into the marketing game, so I'll not market that, but I just share my ideas and thoughts. See, the point remains that India is today at a certain stage of development, and it has a long way. If India has to develop, it has to have more power. It has to generate that power. And that is not possible without depending on coal. So coal has to be there, particularly for the base load. Now it is for the base load, but tomorrow, let us say you get storage capacity, when the costs come down like anything, and solar plus storage is the cheapest. Even in that situation, how much share of the total requirement can solar meet? Even if that share increases, the power demand also increases faster. So how much share of the incremental demand can solar meet? If you ask these two questions, then I'm quite sure you will come to a conclusion that much of this will have to be borne by coal. And that's the reason coal-based power will have to continue for quite some time in this country. Yes, it is important to see that the carbon footprint is minimized. Like washing could be one approach. You use lesser quantity of coal. You do some technological innovation at the user's end and see that the coal requirement is reduced. So, for example, the specific consumption of coal can be reduced and things like that. So you use coal more viably in a more sustainable manner, produce coal in a more sustainable manner, move coal in a more sustainable manner. These are the things that you can definitely do, but you can't shed away coal in the next 25, 30, 40 years.
Right, right. So coming back to CIL just for a moment, I mean, we are all envisaging a future where the coal requirement doesn't keep rising, maybe at least tapers off. I've heard you mention at other forums that CIL could potentially even look at making trading quality coal. How could CIL actually go about doing that? Do you think are there any steps being taken to your knowledge at the company to moving in that direction, making coal of a quality that could be traded internationally if, let's say, the demand for coal actually comes down?
You see, unfortunately, if we compare our quality with the traded coal quality, apparently there is not much of scope in this, excepting for some very limited quantity of coal produced in Raniganj coal fields or somewhere in southeastern coal fields, very little quantity. But that quantity is required for heat-intense industry in India. So exporting that coal will not make too much of sense. So I think this doesn't have too much of scope at this point of time, unless we go for large-scale washing, improve the quality of coal. But even then, we can reduce it from 40% to maybe 33, 32%. 32% ash coal doesn't find much usage in the worldwide. So traded coal has ash not more than 17, 18%, even most of it comes in that 12, 13% or lower range. So I think ash will become a problem.
Right, right. Sir, just a final couple of thoughts. I mean, if you were to summarize, just this would be the final question for the session. If you would summarize how you see the performance of coal and Coal India in the upcoming decade, or maybe even a little bit longer period than that, when you see coal maybe tapering off, you could share your final thoughts on how you see coal going forward.
You see, with the right kind of steps taken, coal will definitely stay at the center stage of energy security. See, that position will not get disturbed in the next decade's time. Coal India will have to go in a big way towards improving coal quality. That is one slightly difficult area the company has been suffering for all these years, including my tenure also. And we haven't been able to find a real solution there. So I think through a process of proper collaboration with the consumers, it has to find a solution to that. Maybe correcting the pricing structure and doing whatever. That is one area. Second, it has to do mining in a more sustainable manner. I mean, basically the environmental impact of mining, it is already doing quite a bit. Maybe more can be done. See, that is one. It has to look into the social aspects of mining, I mean, the social impact of mining, and address that as squarely, as properly as possible. I mean, the community from where we take land, etc. There, basically, the principle should be that they should be better off giving the land to us than without. That has to be the central theme of land acquisition. If that is there, then the difficulty in land acquisition will disappear, will not be there to that extent. It will be there because land becomes a political problem. Sometimes political parties, they try to play some games here and there, it becomes a problem. But broadly, if the company pursues the policy, and it does, it's not that I am stating something new. I mean, it has been happening like that only. We try to make a situation where giving the land to Coal India is a better option than keeping the land to themselves, in every sense of the term. I mean, the kind of facilities that are brought in, the kind of township that are created, we particularly tribal belt, we work in tribal belt. So there the focus is to retain tribal culture, allow them to retain their culture, their traditions, have their own deity and all those things. And at the same time, get exposed to modern education, modern Medicare facility, and things like that. So that actually enriches the society around. So if we should pursue that more doggedly, more strongly, so that mining becomes something which is a central part, or rather, it has deeper inroads into the society around the mining places, wherever the mines are. So,
right.
If this is the kind of thing, that means basically we're talking about environmental and social sustainability of mining and quality. If these factors are focused more and more, I think coal will remain at the center of the energy security for at least a decade, definitely.
Right.
and then we'll have to see.
Right, sir. Before I let you go, actually, we got quite a few questions in the Q&A. I'll just one combined question I'll ask you, and then we'll let you go. We know you also have other commitments. So, Mr. Ranganathan, we asked if you think that the government should actually seek to maybe even privatize some mines of CIL as part of the asset monetization plan. Do you think there will be any benefit to that? And as a related thought on privatization, your overall thoughts on the potential for commercial mining. You've said that it should be able to reach close to its capacity, but how soon do you think commercial mining would be able to come up to a level where it's contributing a significant chunk? Maybe all the load will not be on Coal India to provide all of our coal supply.
See, the government has introduced a single window system for helping clearances and all that. And with that, if that becomes effective, particularly at the state level, because a lot of clearances are at the state level, also at the MOEF level. So if these clearances can be really addressed faster and with certain amount of handholding, because they are not all of them are experienced miners, so they need to be handled. So with all that, I think quite a bit of it will come into production. Earlier it was captive usage. There were some other constraints, economic constraints were there. Now it is commercial mining. Coal, there's a shortage of coal, so they can always sell coal in the market. With that kind of freedom, the capacity ramp up should happen. But I will give it something like 3 to 4 years, not before that. But after 4 years, there will be a good complement to Coal India. And regarding giving away Coal India mines doesn't make sense. Because Coal India, if you want them to give mines, will definitely give any number of underground mines, but there will be no takers. And open cast mines, why should we be giving up? Those are the,
Of course. Thank you so much, sir. I mean, this has been an extremely valuable conversation for me personally as a reporter. I'm sure for all of our viewers as well. Thank you so much for taking out the time. I'd like to also thank our associate partners, Yojna IAS and Pandit Deen Dayal Energy University in Gandhinagar. I'm sure this would have been extremely useful for any IAS aspirants and everybody in the energy sector. And thank you again, Mr. Partha Sarathi Bhattacharyya, former CMD of Coal India Limited. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
योजना आईएएस शुरू कर रहा है साल 2022 और 23 यूपीएससी एग्जाम के लिए नए बैचेस हिंदी और इंग्लिश दोनों ही मीडियम में ऑनलाइन और ऑफलाइन क्लासेस के साथ। योजना आईएएस हाईली एक्सपीरियंस्ड फैकल्टी, इंटरैक्टिव ऑनलाइन क्लासेस, एस्से राइटिंग, डाउट क्लासेस, मॉक टेस्ट जैसे फीचर्स के साथ आपके यूपीएससी तैयारी के लिए एक कंप्लीट पैकेज ऑफर करता है। सो व्हाट आर यू वेटिंग फॉर? गो टू आवर वेबसाइट एंड रजिस्टर योरसेल्फ नाउ। योजना आईएएस शुरू कर रहा है साल 2022 और 23 यूपीएससी एग्जाम के लिए नए बैचेस हिंदी और इंग्लिश दोनों ही मीडियम में ऑनलाइन और ऑफलाइन क्लासेस के साथ। योजना आईएएस हाईली एक्सपीरियंस्ड फैकल्टी, इंटरैक्टिव ऑनलाइन क्लासेस, एस्से राइटिंग, डाउट क्लासेस, मॉक टेस्ट जैसे फीचर्स के साथ आपके यूपीएससी तैयारी के लिए एक कंप्लीट पैकेज ऑफर करता है। सो व्हाट आर यू वेटिंग फॉर? गो टू आवर वेबसाइट एंड रजिस्टर योरसेल्फ नाउ।
You answered everything with great candor, and at least to my mind, I haven't spoken my